Surname Wallenberg. Christian name Raoul. Father's name Gustav. Year of birth 1912. Birthplace Stockholm. Address Budapest, number 3 Györpo Street. Profession Diplomatic observer. Workplace Budapest Swedish Embassy. Party membership None. Nationality Swedish. Citizenship Swedish.
Докладываю, что известный вам заключенный Валенберг сегодня ночью в камере внезапно скончался, предположительно вследствие наступившего инфаркта миокарда. Начальник санчасти тюрьмы, полковник медицинской службы Смольцов. 17 июля 1947 года.
Wallenberg was born 1912 into one of the most successful Swedish industrialist dynasties. The year of his birth was also noted because of the ocean liner, the Titanic. The British liner on its first journey to New York collided with an iceberg and sunk, together with its 1,500 passengers.
She was the largest ship in the world, designed to be the epitome of style, luxury, and safety. Her passengers included the world's most famous celebrities. But 4 days into her maiden voyage, she would face a disaster so terrible, it would shatter the faith of an age.
Raoul Wallenberg was born on the 4th of August of the same year. His father, Oscar Wallenberg, was a naval officer. His mother, May Weising, daughter of a famous medical doctor. The birth was overshadowed by a family tragedy. Raoul's father died 3 months earlier. The 21-year-old mother was on her own with little Raoul. The upbringing of the boy was delegated by the family to Gustav Wallenberg, his parental grandfather. His grandfather, who was a Swedish ambassador to Japan and to the Ottoman Empire, had a great influence on Raoul's character and fate. The child matriculated in 1930, who joined the military as part of the Swedish Royal Guard for 9 months. Then he left for America, to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Raoul became an architect, a profession that his artistic abilities predisposed him for. America had a great influence on the young man. He liked the fast pace of life and the informality. After getting his degree in 1935, he returned to Stockholm for a short time. Following the wishes of his grandfather, he went to South Africa, and from there he took a boat to Palestine. His grandfather found him a trainee role in the Dutch Bank of Haifa. In Palestine, which was under British protectorate at the time, he had contact with local Jewish and Arab businessmen. He also met many German Jews who escaped Germany after Hitler came into power. The refugee stories of the Nazis' racial hatred enraged him.
Wir sorgen uns euch, weil wir der Überzeugung sind, dass die Bande dieser Volksgemeinschaft sich niemals und nirgends lösen. Das, was ihr denkt, in dieser Stunde, damals gelobt ihn mir zum ersten Mal als unbekannter Eifer auf diesen Krieg zu beginnen und sich zu ruhen, bis endlich diese Erscheinung aus dem deutschen Leben beseitigt sein würde. Damals gelobt ihn mir zum ersten Mal als unbekannter Eifer auf diesen Krieg zu beginnen und sich zu ruhen, bis endlich diese Erscheinung aus dem deutschen Leben beseitigt sein würde.
He returned to Sweden in 1936, and since he could not use his architectural qualifications, he started a business venture based on a patented idea. The business went bankrupt. The year 1939 also marked the end of the 2 decades-long European peace. World War II broke out. The year also meant the end of the peace years for Hungarian Jews. The Hungarian parliament approved a series of laws restricting activities by the Jews.
Paragraph 5. Jews cannot serve as officers, employees in any public office in the state administration, legal areas, local administration, or social services. This applies also to doctors working for the health department. Jewish teachers at all levels in the education system and public notaries must retire by January 1st, 1943. Jewish judges and prosecutors must retire by January 1st, 1940.
In the neutral Sweden, Raoul Wallenberg continued his business ventures without much success. However, his new job obtained through his uncle in 1949 was defining for the rest of his life. He was employed by the firm Middle European Trading Limited, a company of a Hungarian Jew, Kalman Luer, who lived in Sweden. Representing this firm as a director of foreign trade, Wallenberg travelled to Hungary for the first time in 1942. The second time he arrived to the Hungarian capital, in the fall of 1943, was on business matters. By this time in Hungary, the third Jewish law was in place, enforcing further restrictions on the Jews.
Paragraph 9. Non-Jewish people are prohibited to marry Jews. Paragraph 14. A non-Jewish Hungarian citizen who marries a Jew who marries a non-Jewish Hungarian, a Hungarian citizen Jewish man who marries a foreign citizen Jewish woman despite the prohibition stated in paragraph 9. A Jew who marries a non-Jewish Hungarian, a Hungarian citizen Jewish man who marries a foreign citizen Jewish woman despite the prohibition stated in paragraph 9.
On March 18, 1944, Hitler received Horthy's approval in Klyshim to occupy Hungary. Thus, on March 19, 1944, the German occupying forces moved into Hungary without any resistance. The new Stoyer government complied with all the demands of the Germans and the Hungarian far right. All opposition parties were abolished, and the clean-up was started in the state administration and the army. Books by Jewish writers were eliminated in public, and a myriad of anti-Jewish measures were implemented on top of the existing legal deprivations. From April 5, 1944, every Jewish person older than 6 years, irrespective of their gender, is obliged to wear outside their home, on the left breast area of the outer clothing, a 10 cm by 10 cm canary yellow star made of fabric, silk, or velvet.
We no longer have a radio. All Jews had to submit it. But luckily our neighbor, who is Christian, put his radio out into the window so we can listen. Mother is cutting and sewing the Jewish stars. I can't understand the whole situation. I was always Hungarian, still am. Isn't being Jewish only a religion? One Hungarian is Jewish, the other Catholic or evangelic. Isn't it this way? The other thing I don't understand is then, what am I? Am I Jewish or Hungarian? Or Hungarian with Jewish religion? And why is this a problem?
The official paper of April 21 lists new legislations about Jewish assets. The Minister of Commerce and Transport decreed with immediate effect the closure of Jewish shops. This was just the beginning of the final solution, the moving of all Hungarian Jews to ghettos and transporting them to concentration camps in Germany.
Raoul Mangold was the conductor of the Pécs synagogue, and his most treasured possession was his violin, which he wanted to leave for safekeeping before he was forced to move to the ghetto. He asked many acquaintances to take it from him, but they all refused. His last hope was his long-term neighbor, whom he asked respectfully to keep it until his return, and in case this wouldn't happen, keep it for good. The neighbor said, "I'd be pleased to do it, but won't, because it is against the law to take valuables from Jews." Raoul Mangold, his wife and son Tommy were deported to Auschwitz, and none of them returned.
The first transport of Hungarian Jews arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 30th of April 1944. Between 15th of May and 8th of July, more than half of the Hungarian Jewry, totaling at least 437,402, were deported, and of those, a maximum of 10 to 12% survived after a selection process. The speed with which the Hungarian authorities expelled the country's Jews from society was unparalleled, even in the history of the Holocaust.
Louis de Vries, Willy van Praag, Heinrich Meijer, Johan Ensel. Be quiet. I hear footsteps. There is someone coming. Someone's in my door.
The leadership of the Swedish Jewry started negotiations with the American War Refugee Board Stockholm representative. This organization was established by President Roosevelt. Its task was to save Jews and other victims from the Nazi massacre. The Stockholm representative, Ivar Olsson, set up a committee from known Swedish Jews and asked their advice to help the Hungarian Jews. In the group were Norbert Mercer, Stockholm representative of the Jewish World Congress, Marcus Ehrenpreis, Swedish chief rabbi, and Kalman Lahr, businessman. The group went to the Swedish Foreign Ministry and asked them to put diplomatic pressure on Hungary to save the Jews. As a result of protests from abroad, including from the Swedish king, as well as the documents describing the terrible fate of the deported, Horthy stopped the deportations in early June. Gustav V of Sweden's letter telegram to Governor Miklos Horthy on the 30th of June 1944.
After being informed about the extremely stern measures your government applies to the Hungarian Jewish population, I personally turn to your Highness in the name of humanity and ask for the intervention for those unfortunate ones who can still be saved. This request, addressed to your good heart, is dictated by the friendly sentiments I carry towards your country, and it is my sincere wish that Hungary should preserve its good reputation among all nations. Signature, Gustav, King of Sweden.
Prime Minister Dom Sawyer's letter to Justinian Seredi, Cardinal of Hungary, on the 7th of July, 1944.
To comply with repeated requests from your eminency regarding the measures related to the Jews, the government made the following modifications. Point 1. On July 6, 1944, an advocacy organization was established for the Jews of Christian faith, which will take care of Jews belonging to Christian churches, independently from the Alliance of Hungarian Jews. And point 3. The deportation of Budapest Jews is stopped until further notice.
The Stockholm Committee, established to help the Hungarian Jews, decided that they needed a serious representative to go to Budapest to organize rescue missions. This person could not come from the WRB in America, as the two countries were at war with each other. A Swedish person, with the support of the Swedish government, was needed. The Swedish Foreign Ministry liked the idea and asked Chief Rabbi Ehrenpriest to recommend a suitable person for this mission. The Chief Rabbi asked Kalman Lauer to suggest a suitable person. Lauer recommended his own employee, Raoul Wallenberg, for the mission. Raoul Wallenberg for the mission. Raoul Wallenberg for the mission.
Jenno Levi, Wallenberg's well-known biographer, writes, Wallenberg's negotiations with the Swedish Foreign Ministry lasted several days. He insisted on having no restrictions. At the end, a deal was struck with the following key points. He gets free hand for the rescue missions. He can even use bribery to save lives. If he feels the need to report personally, he can return home at any time without prior permission. If the American financial resources are not sufficient, funds can be raised via Swedish newspaper propaganda. He started his trip with the title as Royal Embassy Secretary with the monthly salary of 2,000 Swedish krona. The Swedish Foreign Ministry tacitly agreed to Wallenberg making contact in Budapest with locals opposing the government and the Germans, whose lists of names were provided to him at the English and American embassies in Stockholm. Raoul Wallenberg arrived in Budapest on July 9, 1944, and went straight to the Swedish embassy.
Bíbor piros ajkat, csókra csábító, most a szobámban magam vagyok is.
Embassy Secretary Per Anga informed him about previous Jewish rescue missions. During his first days in Budapest, he conducted introductory or refresher visits, writes his other eminent chronicler, Marie Ember. This record remained because in 1989 the Soviets returned Raoul's notebook, which unfortunately is not a diary to the Wallenberg family. It only contains times and places of meetings. The first visited address is the Swiss embassy. They represented the interest of citizens of warring nations who remained in Hungary. Karl Lutz, vice-consul and later consul who worked there, already participated in Jewish rescue missions. He was the first who managed to exempt people with foreign Palestinian visas from anti-Jewish laws. Wallenberg sent his first report from Budapest to Stockholm 1 week after his arrival. Up to today, with the exemption of Budapest, they deported all Jews from Hungary. In Budapest, they crowded them into houses with yellow stars on them. Their freedom to move around is very limited. This is how 200,000 Jews live in Budapest. Acquiring of food is very difficult. By August, Wallenberg had organized the B department, the humanitarian one, at the Swedish embassy. This catered for the protection of those who had family connections with Sweden, or they had economic contacts with Swedish firms. These people received from the Swedish Foreign Ministry the temporary passports in 4 languages, so-called provisoriska passes. Of course, the Swedish diplomat wanted to expand the rescue action to a wider circle. Another Wallenberg biographer, John Biermann, writes about this. First, the Hungarian Foreign Ministry gave permissions to Wallenberg to issue 1,500 safe conduct letters. With clever negotiations, he increased this number to 2,500 and then to 4,500. In the meantime, they produced 3 times this number, and when they could not print more official safe conduct letters, his office issued a simplified version, a document with his signature. In those chaotic times, very often these worked. In his report, September 12, Wallenberg indicated that the Hungarian authorities promised the Germans that they will remove the Jews from Budapest, and as the first step of this plan, they will call up the men who are capable for forced labour. Wallenberg managed to achieve that those with a Swedish protection passport, Schutzpass, were exempt. He writes in his report about the clerical activity related to the producing these Swedish protection passports. The work is done in 2 shifts, daytime and nighttime. All workers and their families, about 250 persons, are exempt from wearing the yellow star and have foreign ministry and internal ministry documents. The number of people looking for help is huge. We are checking thousands and thousands of applications. Letter on the official stationery of the Kingdom of Sweden on October 10, 1944. To the National Central Authority for the Control of Foreigners, Budapest. We are pleased to advise you that the Swedish Embassy of Budapest issued a safe conduct passport for Madame Ferenc Kalna, who was accordingly considered a Swedish subject. The embassy requests to give the above name exemption from wearing the distinctive sign. The embassy certifies that the relationship with Sweden referenced to in the relevant decree exists. October 10, 1944. With respect, Raoul Wallenberg, Swedish Embassy Secretary. The Yarrow Cross coup d'etat putting Salassi in power on October 15, 1944, made the Jewish rescue missions by the neutral embassies, the Swedish, the Swiss, the Portuguese and the Holy See, more difficult. The fight for the official Hungarian acceptance of safe conduct passes had to be restarted. Salassi's manifesto was very threatening. I do not recognize any safe conduct pass or foreign passport which was given to a Jew with a Hungarian citizenship from anywhere or anybody. At this moment, the Jews living in Hungary are under the control of the Hungarian state, and nobody internally or from abroad can interfere in this issue. On the first night of the coup d'etat, many people were arrested and there were pogroms. About 100 to 200 persons were killed. Many Jewish houses were taken for the Arrow Cross party. Several hundred people disappeared. On the first day, I was forced to ride a woman's bicycle on the street full of gangsters. I spent the second day moving staff to safe places with a car and providing food for them.
The Swedish Royal Embassy announces that the relevant authorities nominated at the Bonjnia Ut 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 12, 14, 15, 17 and 22 houses as accommodation for those who have safe conduct passes. The relevant documents for the accommodation can be collected at the Swedish Royal Embassy. On November 20th, the authorities nominated a further 19 houses for people with Swedish protection. The houses are Katona Joseph Utka, 10A,
Katona József utca 10A,
14,
21,
21,
23A, 31, Pannonia utca 8, 15, 17A, 36, Tátra utca 4, 5,
21, 23A, 31, Pannonina, Utka, 8, 15, 17A, 36, Tatra, Utka, 4,
Phoenix
5, 5A, 6, 12A, 14 to 16, 15A, 15B, Phoenix Utka 7.
Mindig az a perc a legszebb, meg nem áll az élet, az a legszebb szó, mit el nem csókolunk.
The Germans again sent SS Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann to Hungary, where he reached an agreement with Arrow-crossed Interior Minister Gábor Várnya in October that the Hungarian authorities will provide 50,000 Jews for the Germans' forced labor. Because of the insufficient capacity and or bad conditions of the railways, the Jews will have to walk towards the western border on foot. The march will be accompanied by the Arrow Cross and Eichmann's Sonderkommando until the Austrian border. At Hegischlom, in the early morning hours, they started to transfer of the Jews from the Hungarians to the Germans. Wallenberg's team travelled there with the aim of saving as many people as possible before the transfers took place by using the Swedish safe conduct method. Members of the Arrow Cross recognised their intentions and wanted to stop that. They also terrorised the Gendarmerie to prevent them from helping with the selection. Luckily, with Wallenberg's sure and confident attitude, the Gendarmerie did not make the selection more difficult, and the people with safe conduct passes started to return to Budapest. On the way back, we saw, at many places, the roadside covered with the bodies killed by the Arrow Cross. In John Berman's book, Miriam Herzog in Tel Aviv remembers the death marches and how she and many others were rescued by Wallenberg.
On the Hungarian-German border, I managed to get into a stable where they already kept several hundred women, all stating that they have Swedish protection. Suddenly there was a frenetic movement among the women. "This is Wallenberg," they said. "I do not know his name, but somebody said he is a Swedish diplomat who has already saved many Jews." I was lying on the ground while he was surrounded by a lot of women, all saying, "Save us, save us." He said to the women around him, "I am sorry, but I can't help everybody. I only have documents for 100 people." He looked around and he started to write down names. When he saw me lying on the ground, he came over to me. He asked my name and put it on the list. After 1 or 2 days, those 100 of us who were on the list got into a cattle wagon, which was then attached to a train going to Budapest.
The end of November, Wallenberg had to fight for his people in the protected houses as the Eurocross gangs were robbing the houses. The Eurocross members often tore up the protection documents and took the owners away, tortured and killed them. Wallenberg's team recorded the details when they found out. They passed them on to the Hungarian authorities for investigation, together with their protestation. On December 6, István Lauenberger went to the Eurocross house at 46 Kapas Utka to claim back his valuables taken from him during the earlier arrest. He was accompanied by 2 high-ranking Swedish representatives who were forced to leave by the armed Eurocross. Lauenberger was detained and no trace of him was found. 2 weeks ago, Georgi Balint was kidnapped on Berlin Square by Eurocross members in the evening hours while moving between 2 embassy offices, 6 Tatra Utka and 1 Yorki Utka. There is no sighting of him since. Embassy clerk Josef Bihari was taken from his home to the Hadik barracks on Svarbaje on December 10, with no trace since. Details from Wallenberg's last diplomatic report sent by courier on December 8, 1944. Since the last report, the situation of the Hungarian Jews further deteriorated. The weather, since the death marches started, has been cold and rainy. As a result of our intervention, we managed to bring back about 2,000 persons. From this, 500 from Hegi Shalom. This last rescue type we had to stop as members of the Eichmann Commando threatened us with violence. The Budapest Jews were crowded into a central ghetto where they want to house 69,000, or possibly more, and 17,000 in the foreign ghetto. In the ghettos, 4 to 12 people live in one room. Excerpts from the memoirs of Martin Gustonier, who worked as a clerk for the Swiss embassy. On January 9, around 10 o'clock at night, the Eurocross men, together with the SS, arrived. Immediately they ordered the women to undress, leave only their petticoats on, and face the wall. After the women, they called out the doctors, and lastly, the men over 60. They had to undress as well. A few younger men were called out. Altogether, 80 people were gathered and taken away. Some men had to walk in socks without shoes because the Eurocross men liked their shoes. Erno Belov, a chief physician, was among this group. He had pneumonia, a high temperature, 40 degrees, and was semi-conscious. An Eurocross member called Oski forced him to drink pesticide. He was tied up to the others by wire and taken away. The next day, the news emerged that people taken away the previous day were shot dead on the banks of the Danube. At the last minute, the Arrow Cross members wanted to kill the Jews who were locked up in the Budapest ghetto. When the news reached Wallenberg, he immediately demanded that the German commander Gerhard Schmidhuber should act immediately to prevent the massacre. If he refused to act, Wallenberg would make sure that Schmidhuber would finish on the gallows when the Russians marched in. The German commander immediately gave out his orders. The details remained unclear. In the end, the German military prevented the 68,000 Jews in the ghetto from being massacred. Wallenberg saved tens of thousands of Jews. The Soviet army liberated the ghetto on January 18. Around 3,000 dead bodies were found unburied. Out of them, 2,218 were buried later in mass graves.
Thinking about life after the war, Wallenberg unveiled his grand plan to his Hungarian confidants about an international relief operation. He wished to establish an organization to help the people whom he sheltered, and also help the relatives of the deportees and those who were exiled in the West. His wish was that the newly formed Hungarian government in Debrecen would endorse his plans and would treat them with state significance. He planned to travel to Debrecen as soon as possible, ask Marshal Malinowski permission to start negotiations with the Hungarian government and try to reach an agreement. Wallenberg met the arriving Soviet troops on the 13th of January in the Red Cross building at Bensker Street. Dr. Laszlo Peto, a member of the Budapest Jewish Council, gave the following account. On the 17th of January, I visited my friends at 16 Bensker Street. I found Wallenberg there. He came to say goodbye and collect his belongings. He mentioned that he had planned to visit the people he had protected in Tatra Street. and then he was headed to Debrecen. I was planning to visit some of my acquaintances at the protected quarter. We sat in the car parking in front of the building. The driver was Vilmos Langfelder, an engineer. He was Wallenberg's regular driver. Wallenberg turned around and showed us the motorbike following our car. The motorbike was driven by an armed Russian soldier. "They are on duty," Wallenberg remarked in German. "I don't know whether they are defending me or guarding me. I am not sure whether I am a guest or a prisoner. I don't know whether they are defending me or guarding me. I am not sure whether I am a guest or a prisoner. They are defending me or guarding me. I am not sure whether
Raoul Wallenberg never arrived to Debrecen because the Soviets arrested him. When it happened exactly, we don't know. We know that in 1991, the Russians handed over to the Swedish Foreign Ministry a report, among other documents regarding Wallenberg, written by Major Petrovsky, the head of the counterintelligence of the Second Ukraine Front, dated January 23, 1945. Wallenberg and his driver Langfelder's names are not mentioned, but it is most likely that the document was about their arrest. The organizations of the Second Ukraine Front gave out a report regarding the arrests of the enemy forces between January 1 and 20, 1945. 48 individuals were arrested. Out of them, 39 were German spies, 7 of them Hungarian spies. In that period, 3 individuals who worked for the diplomatic missions were arrested, and 2 of them were employees of the Swedish embassy. It was signed by Major Petrovsky and dated January 23, 1945. The outside world received 2 signals from the Soviets about Wallenberg during the winter of 1945. Yekenesov, the deputy Soviet foreign minister, informed Mr. Soderblom, the Swedish ambassador in Moscow, on January 16, 1945, that Wallenberg was under Soviet protection. In February 1945, the same message was sent to Maj von Dadel, Wallenberg's mother, from Alexandra Kollontai, the Soviet ambassador in Stockholm. On March 8, Radio Kossuth in Budapest broadcast the following news. Wallenberg was killed on the way to Debrecen. The act was probably committed by Hungarian fascists or Gestapo agents. Following this, the fate of Wallenberg was not mentioned for 12 years.
In February 1957, the Soviet authorities declared that Wallenberg was not in the Soviet Union. However, in February 1945, he was in a Moscow prison called Lubyanka. The Russian documents handed over to the Swedes in 1991 proved it. A prison file dated 6th of February 1945 contained the diary of his interrogation.
Surname Wallenberg. Christian name Raoul. Father's name Gustav. Year of birth 1912. Birthplace
Государственной безопасности СССР. 18
Address?
июля 1947
Budapest,
года.
number 3, György
Ранним
Street.
утром в кабинет министра госбезопасности
Profession.
СССР Виктора Абакумова
Diplomatic
вошел
observer.
начальник санитарной части Лубянской тюрьмы
Workplace.
полковник Смальцов.
Budapest,
В
Swedish
руках он держал
Embassy.
тонкую папку.
Party
Раскрыв ее,
membership?
Смальцов протянул министру написанный от руки рапорт.
Nationality
Докладываю, что известный вам заключенный
Swedish.
Валенберг сегодня ночью в камере
Citizenship.
внезапно скончался. Предположительно, вследствие наступившего
Prison
инфаркта
diary,
миокарда.
serial number
Начальник санчасти
107.
тюрьмы,
The
полковник
prisoner's family
медицинской
name
службы
and
Смальцов.
initials.
17
Wallenberg
июля
R.G.
1947 года.
The hearing was initiated by Severisic. Under the text, the photo can be seen. The cell number 48/8. Leaving to the hearing 5 minutes past 1 o'clock. The time of return 35 minutes past 4. The signature of the interrogated after his return, R. Wallenberg.
Marshal Stalin received Soderblom, Moscow's Swedish ambassador, on the 15th of June 1946. The occasion was Soderblom's departure. Up until then, Sweden had several times demanded the tracking down of Wallenberg. After the conversation, Soderblom announced that he was convinced that Wallenberg came the victim of a road accident or killed by bandits. He further asked the Soviets to give an official statement that they undertook all necessary steps to find Wallenberg, but those attempts were unsuccessful. Several people believe that the Swedish attitude sealing the fate of Wallenberg. In the following years, several letters were sent to the Soviet leaders inquiring about the fate of Wallenberg.
To General Joseph Stalin, I am the mother of Raoul Wallenberg, the Secretary of Budapest Swedish Assembly. I turn to the great leader of the Soviet Union and ask him to return my beloved son. I will mention briefly that from July 1944 until January 1945, my son was fighting with all his power and intelligence against the Nazi terror, which wanted to annihilate the total Jewish population of Budapest. When the Soviet troops liberated Budapest in January 1945, my son was put under the safeguard of the Russian military authorities. It was announced officially by the Soviet Foreign Authority. That communication with the Swedish Foreign Ministry was dated on January 17th. Since that time, 2.5 years have passed without further information from the Soviet authorities. Now I approach the leader of the Soviet Union with my request to let my son return to Sweden. Yours sincerely, Mai von Dardel, dated July 26, 1947.
The Soviet official letter addressed to Solomon, Swedish ambassador in Moscow, dated August 18, 1947. Dear Mr. Ambassador, on June 12 you had a discussion with J.A. Malik, Deputy Foreign Minister, and you asked questions regarding the whereabouts of Raoul Wallenberg. I made inquiries at appropriate Soviet authorities. The outcome of a thorough investigation showed that Wallenberg is not in the Soviet Union, and a person fitting that description is not known to the authorities. Signed, A. Wyszynski, Deputy Foreign Minister.
Человек из стали. Фильм Ферруччо Валерия.
The secret nature of the Russian history archives makes it very difficult to clarify Stalin's role in the fate of Wallenberg. Some of the Wallenberg experts believe that the order to arrest Wallenberg came directly from Stalin, as it became a known fact regarding the arrest of two Swedish diplomats, Feller and Mayer, in Budapest. Just before his death, the Soviet dictator was planning a show trial with fabricated accusations against Jewish doctors. He accused them of Zionist conspiracy to kill the Soviet leaders. After the death of Stalin, the accusations dissipated, and the showcase trial did not take place. At the same time, another showcase trial was planned in Budapest to prove the death of Raoul Wallenberg. It did not go ahead either. The Budapest Jewish Council was accused of activities against the Hungarian people. The Secret Service arrested Leos Stockler and Miksa Domokos, the former leaders of the Budapest ghetto. They underwent terrible torture and were forced to lie, as was Paul Zalai, who was helping Wallenberg. Zalai confessed that Wallenberg was killed in the cellar of Budapest American Embassy. He added that he saw with his own eyes the body of Wallenberg, killed by Stockler and Domokos. It took 4 years after the death of Stalin for the Soviets to announce to the world that Raoul Wallenberg was their prisoner between 1945 and 1947. Gromyko, Soviet foreign minister, handed over a document to the Moscow Swedish ambassador on the 6th of February 1957 that contained the following information.
The Soviet authorities thoroughly searched all the relevant archives in order to find data related to Wallenberg. The prisoner's registry and the relevant investigation materials were checked. One document that was found among the Lubyanka's prison's health records suggested that it was related to Wallenberg. It was a handwritten report addressed to Abakumov, the ex-Soviet internal minister, and written by A.L. Smolikov, the head of the prison's health service. The text was as follows: I am reporting that Wallenberg, whom you know well, died unexpectedly in his cell last night, probably as a result of a heart attack. As I received an order from you to look after him personally, I would ask for permission to perform an autopsy to establish the exact cause of his death. Signed, Smolikov, Dr. Colonel, Head of the Prison Health Service, dated July 17, 1947. There was a further comment on the document also signed by Smolikov. I informed the minister personally and I received an order to cremate the body without an autopsy. Signed, Smolikov, Dr. Colonel, Head of the Prison Health Service, dated July 17, 1947. There was a further comment on the document also signed by Smolikov. I informed the minister personally and I received an order to cremate the body without an autopsy. Further documents or information from witnesses were not found. Part of the reason for this was probably that A.L. Smolikov died on May 7, 1953. We had to conclude, based on those documents, that Wallenberg died in July 1947. Abakumov, whose deeds were against the Soviet law and who damaged the Soviet Union's reputation, was sentenced to death by the High Court of the Soviet Union and was executed. The Swedish government was stunned by the letter. It took them a week to think about their reply. Finally, a document was given to Grimakov by Raoul Solomon, ambassador, on February 19, which contained the following lines: every piece of information given by the Soviets is questionable. As time passed, at the end of the 50s, in the 60s and early 80s, 1 or 2 lines from the prisoners of the Gulag found their way to the press that Wallenberg did not die in 1947, as the Soviets stated. Most of them believed that they had spotted the diplomat in Vladimir prison. As a result of that, the Swedish-Russian committee investigating the Wallenberg case thoroughly in 2000 wrote a chapter about the Vladimir prison. Wallenberg used to share his cell with people who, after sentencing, were sent to Vladimir prison. Some of those prisoners, after their liberation, defected to the West, and there they gave their witness account regarding Wallenberg. The prison had prisoners whom only had numbers, not names, and only their numbers were written on their records. The Work Committee report contained some of the prisoners' recollections. Those statements opened up the possibility but did not prove that Wallenberg was the prisoner of Vladimir prison.
Horst Theodor Mühl, journalist, was born in Essen in 1911 and was a prisoner at Vladimir prison between the 24th of February and 22nd of September 1956. Mühl shared a cell with a Georgian prisoner named Gogi Bertz. He told Mühl that when he was in the prison hospital, he heard from the other prisoners about Raoul Wallenberg. He was told that Wallenberg was kept in a solitary cell in Vladimir prison. Mühl and Gogi Bertz's prison notes were thoroughly investigated by the Russian-Swedish Work Committee, but he could not find any proof of that information. An ex-prisoner, Otto Schogel, was born in Vienna in 1921. He communicated with the Zurich Swedish consulate and told them in 1956 that between the 16th of April and 28th of May 1955, he was a patient in the prison hospital, and he met Raoul Wallenberg there. In his subsequent interviews, Schogel stated that either in 1952 or 1953, he was transferred from Vorkuta to Vladimir and met Wallenberg in January 1955. The Swede told him that he had been kept in prison since 1945. He was transferred to Vladimir around 1949 to 1950. Schogel's remaining prison files were checked, but there were no notes relating to Wallenberg. An ex-Vladimir prisoner, Solgin, stated that he arrived to Vladimir together with Raoul Wallenberg, but they were placed in different prison cells. He was in Block 2 between 1947 and 1956. According to the prison notes, the number 2 cell was empty between 24th of July 1947 and 1st of June 1948. The committee established the facts that among the prison cards, several prisoners' material went missing, especially around 25th of July 1947, when Solgin arrived to Vladimir. Furthermore, the committee found that the registration of around 1,000 prisoners were missing or was very scarce around the spring of 1947. The Swedish-Russian committee tried to find out what really happened to Raoul Wallenberg in 1947, but could not find any strong evidence. The report verified that the most accepted version of Wallenberg's fate was that he was shot dead. Alexander Yakovlev, the member of the Soviet Political Committee, reported at the 1989 Autumn Committee meeting where Khrushchev, the head of the KGB, spoke about the Wallenberg case. They brought some of Raoul's personal belongings from the archives of the KGB. Among them were his notebook from 1944, his driver's license and passport. Those items were handed over to the Wallenberg family in 1989. The report of Khrushchev was in line with the official Soviet version in 1957, which concluded that Wallenberg probably died of a heart attack. At the end of that committee meeting, Yakovlev directly asked Khrushchev what really happened to Wallenberg. Khrushchev's answer that Wallenberg was shot dead in 1947, but no documents relating to the case were kept, and no witnesses remained who were still alive. This version was in line with Kondratyev, KGB General's statement. What was behind Raoul Wallenberg's arrest? The Swedish-Russian committee tried to answer that question in a 17-page final report. However, the final conclusion was, the reason and the real motive behind the arrest could not be established. The finding of the real motive was hindered by the lack of documents, and the committee could not rule out the possibility of misinformation. The committee believed that the root of the problem was the extreme mistrust of the Soviets with foreigners. It could have intensified to spy hysteria. It was well known that Wallenberg and the other members of the Budapest Swedish consulate were charged with espionage by the Soviets. One of the reasons might have been that the Soviets regarded the Wallenberg family as capitalists working for the Germans. The Soviets were aware that Wallenberg's mission in Budapest was initiated by the American War Refugees Committee. The Russians were also aware that the Stockholm member of that committee, Ivar Olsson, worked for the American Secret Service, the OSS. Wallenberg's Budapest mission was mainly financed by the international Jewish organization, Joint. The Soviets regarded that organization as an umbrella for American agents. The Soviets believed that Wallenberg was also spying for the Americans. There was a document that Wallenberg planned to show to Marshal Malinowski regarding the rebuilding of Europe. It seemed that he did not intend to give a huge role to the Soviet Union, who occupied Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union might have believed that the plan was a plot by the Western powers against the Soviets. Several hypotheses could be listed about the Wallenberg arrest. The Soviets wanted to recruit him as a Soviet spy and use him as an exchange for a Soviet spy caught in the West. Maybe Wallenberg knew too much about the Katyn massacre, received documents from the Polish refugees, etc. Unfortunately, a clear picture does not emerge. 11 questions are still unanswered today. The Swedish-Russian Work Committee published these questions in a report in 2000 regarding the fate of Wallenberg. Those questions remained unanswered. In 2000, the final conclusion of the Swedish-Russian Committee was, until we do not have reliable evidence about what happened to Raoul Wallenberg, we need to keep asking the questions relating to the testimonies and witnesses, and we have to find the right answers to those. It would be especially important to know the truth regarding the empty cells at the Vladimir prison, and the several testimonies mentioning Wallenberg as a prisoner after the date given of his death. On the 28th of May 2012, there was an international conference in Moscow, organized by Vadim Burstein and Suzanne Berger, Wallenberg researchers. The title of the conference was Raoul Wallenberg, a hero of the 20th century. Burstein and Berger gave a lecture, and they stated that in November 2009, Russian researchers who worked on the archives confirmed Willy Rodol's statement that he was Wallenberg's cellmate, and Wallenberg was interrogated on the 22nd of July 1947. The researchers also had a surprise announcement that prisoner number 7 was among the group of prisoners interrogated on the 23rd of July 1947. The Russians concluded that the prisoner number 7 was highly likely to be Raoul Wallenberg. If it were proven to be true, this would be the first piece of evidence that Raoul Wallenberg was alive 6 days after he was pronounced to be dead in the official Soviet report dated 17th of July 1947. The Russian authorities have so far not responded to those questions relating to to prisoner number 7.
11 questions are still unanswered until today. The Swedish-Russian Work Committee published these questions in their report in 2000 regarding the fate of Wallenberg. Who was personally responsible from the Soviet Party to give the order for Wallenberg's arrest and transport to Moscow? What were the motives behind the decision? And why was Wallenberg kept in prison? Have the reasons changed in the passing of time? What exactly happened to Wallenberg on July 17, 1947? If Raoul Wallenberg did die on that day, how did it happen? If Wallenberg was executed, who gave the order? If he was executed, was he buried? In what circumstances did Wallenberg's driver Vilmos Langfelder alleged death occur in March 1948? Alleged death occur in March 1948.
The Swedish-Russian Work Committee published these questions in a report in 2000 regarding the fate of Wallenberg. Those questions remained unanswered. In 2000, the final conclusion of the Swedish-Russian Committee was, until we do not have reliable evidence about what happened to Raoul Wallenberg, we need to keep asking the questions relating to the testimonies and witnesses, and we have to find the right answers to those. It would be especially important to know the truth regarding the empty cells at the Vladimir prison, and the several testimonies mentioning Wallenberg as a prisoner after the date given of his death.